The topic of this video was decided by my patrons over on Patreon. Heyo, I'm R&M. This video is going to be a more personal one, which I know is a change from the usual things I put out, but I hope that in making it more personal, it'll reach people in a more authentic way. Alright, so, last year, I began reading books for the first time in a long time. I think the last time I finished any book for any reason outside of school was the Hunger Games trilogy, around the time the first movie had released. I was in middle school, and I don't remember why I started reading it. All I know is that I was completely sucked in, and I binged the entire trilogy in a month or two. I remember the tears I shed when Rue was killed, and I remember the shock I felt at the second book ending on a pretty big cliffhanger, and I remember the dread in my stomach throughout most of the third and final book. Most strangely though, I remember spending one Friday night, staying up late, with a book in my hand instead of the usual screen in my face. Because it felt odd, out of the ordinary. But like, in a good way? I know I read a little more YA dystopian fiction after that, but at some point, I just stopped reading for fun entirely. I don't think I'm alone in this sort of experience. I've met or heard lots of people who have either read as a kid or never read at all, but wish they did now. They wish they had the attention span, or the motivation, or maybe wish that the many, many screens that we surround ourselves with weren't so bewitching. Last year, I came across a passage by the late Ursula K. Le Guin, and I'd like to share it with you. For all our delight in the impermanent, the entrancing flicker of electronics, we also long for the unalterable. Arthur dreams eternally of Avalon. Bilbo can go there and back again, and there is always the beloved familiar Shire. Don Quixote sets out forever to kill a windmill. So people turn to the realms of fantasy for stability, ancient truths, immutable simplicities. Back in 2001, when this passage was first published, electronics were distinct, their experiences ephemeral, and fantastical escapism was disconnected from it. Now though, 25 years later, I think this passage sticks with me because electronics themselves have become the unalterable, and video games in particular are a widespread source of those fantastical, immutable simplicities. That new flicker of electronics is what kept me away from books, from reading really anything at all as a teenager and a college kid. I sought that immutable simplicity of Stardew Valley, of Pokémon, of Minecraft. Sources of simple escapism, sights and sounds that would hold my sense of place, my sense of purpose, with a farm to tend, a team to train, and a house to build. It sort of worked for a time, but it eventually felt hollow, like it was missing something. Like that comfortable certainty was now too shallow, and like I couldn't swim in its depths anymore. Like I had grown too large for this kiddie pool of comfort. I don't know, maybe my brain had developed more or something, but by then, the routine had stuck. If I'm bored or alone, I search for the screams, the flickers keeping me company. In 2020 though, something changed. Well, a lot of things changed. But in this specific case, I was living in a house with 4 of my friends for my last 2 semesters of college, in the fall of 2020 and the spring of 2021. Despite the packed house, I had my own room, my own space, for the first time in my life, and it was incredible to me. And because classes were all online still, I spent most of my time in that one room, sleeping, working, and playing. One part of me was happy, but well, aside from my roommates, I didn't really interact with anybody. Yes, because we were all still wary of COVID, but I was going through a lot personally, so even if there were chances to do new things, meet new people, make new friends, I would often just stay in my room, with my flickers, alone. At some point though, the shallow feeling, the loneliness frankly, got to be too much, so I went seeking for something new, something that could at least be a painkiller for the loneliness. So I played Coffee Talk. For those who don't know, Coffee Talk is a visual novel / talking simulator created by Toge Productions. It's very warm, very down to earth, set exclusively within a coffee shop where you're the owner and barista. You serve hot drinks to the handful of regulars, while the Seattle rain pitter-patters against the streets outside, and the chill lo-fi music ties together the warmth of the scene. Coincidentally, it's also set in the year 2020. I think what makes Coffee Talk special, aside from the immaculate vibes, is the genuine human nature of it. From Toge Productions' website, it's, quote, a game that tries to depict our lives as humanly as possible. And it's very successful, I think. So successful, in fact, it's one of the few games I've ever written a Steam review for. Posted on December 11th, 2020. I played this during COVID times, so there isn't much going out and seeing/making friends. But this game was able to help me feel like I was meeting people again. Obviously, they aren't real people, but there are relationships and interpersonal conflicts that feel real compared to none at all. This game makes the player feel welcomed in a warm, relaxing setting, and it does this spectacularly. I highly recommend this game for anyone who needs to feel the warmth of platonic companionship in such an isolated time. Honestly, I began brainstorming and writing the script for this video well before rereading this review from past me, and it's a little uncanny how much the feelings from this game have stuck with me over the past 5 years. I don't remember the game itself that well, and frankly forgot about half the characters before recently replaying it. But the feeling, the sense of community, the warmth, the humanness of it, that I remember. Like past me said, it's no replacement for real, genuine, human-to-human interaction, and yet I think it changed my brain yet again. For the longest time, I had been drowning my eyes and ears in video games as a means of escape or distraction. The immutable familiarity that provides flashy, cold, pseudo-comfort to keep my mind away from the real world in every conscious minute. That was enough. Now, though, I've had a sense of something deeper, something warmer, something human. It had recontextualized the games I had been playing up to that point, and how I approached them. In Stardew Valley, I started noticing the softer, subtler things, the quirks in the writing style that gave the town and its characters their unique feeling, the breadth of the decorations that allowed me to make my farm much more of an artistic endeavor rather than just an economic one. And I started essentially role-playing, thinking of myself as a character, as a part of the game, instead of just me looking for an escape for a while. And it changed my approach to new games I'd play, like Rain World. Despite having almost no dialogue, I was determined to learn more about the grungy, decaying, hyper-urban environment. I wanted to know what happened here, and I wanted to immerse myself in a truly special mood that Video Cult had crafted. Despite my shockingly intense frustrations with the start of the game, I persisted. I wanted to understand this game at a deeper level, and in the end, I succeeded, and it was so worth it. A few times in previous videos, I've touched on the fact that I like to remember that video games are made by people, real human beings, not by some abstract game-making factory, even if it feels like that way sometimes. My time with Coffee Talk back in 2020, I think, was the first time I actually felt this reality. Like, sure, I'd known that logically games are made by people, but it hadn't clicked in my distracted mind until I experienced a very human, very down-to-earth story. A story I felt that could actually happen, despite the elves, orcs, and vampires. It was irrefutable, emotional proof that this game was made by someone who I was more alike than different. Someone, or a group of someones, whose words had cut through the synthetic muck of late-night blue light, and tickled my brain and touched my heart in a way that I could no longer ignore. This game, all games, are made by human beings. This revelation amazingly affected my relationship with other forms of expression as well, with paintings, with music, with novels and poetry, with all forms of art. I remember during the spring of 2021, after graduating with my bachelor's degree, I spent my last day on campus, not leaving as soon as the job was done, not wasting away in my now empty room, but instead visiting my now alma mater's art museum, taking in the exhibits that I would likely never see again. Appreciating, at least for a moment, the dozens of lifetimes of work and creative drive, the humanity on display, without fanfare, without revelry, for free. While writing the script, I came across a keynote speech given by Brandon Sanderson late last year. The speech itself focuses on AI arts, which is a whole different topic that I won't even touch on right now, but I want to show a clip from his speech that struck me deeply.
The book, the painting, the film script is not the only art. It's important, but in a way it's a receipt. It's a diploma. The book you write, the painting you create, the music you compose is important and artistic, but it's also a mark of proof that you have done the work to learn, because in the end of it all, you are the art.
You are the art. You, a person, a human being, a creature compelled to create from something unplaceable and undefinable, are the reason a piece of art is meaningful. Without you, that piece of human expression, whether a painting, an album, a novel, is no longer human, and necessarily, it is meaningless. And so I seek art because it is human. Because I can witness the dedication to honing the craft, and I can see or hear or read the pieces of the artist vulnerably splayed across the screen or the canvas. And I can feel that the artist, whoever, wherever, or whenever they may be, is real, is another human being like me. In early 2025, I had considered myself a pretty avid art enjoyer at that point. I enjoyed going to museums and art galleries when I could, and I played video games with more intentionality. But I was still under the spell of my phone, of social media, of scrolling aimlessly, endlessly. I enjoyed the time away from the mindless swipes down my feeds, whenever I could, but the usual activities where my phone would be away, I couldn't do all of the time. Like, I can't go to an art gallery at 10 p.m. on a random Tuesday. I can't cook, or go for a hike, or really play video games at that time either. So, to keep out any whiff of idleness, I'd reflexively grab my phone and start scrolling. I'm sure I'm not alone in this feeling. Maybe you can relate to it. But at some point, I got tired of it, so I picked up a book. That previous Christmas, I was gifted a copy of The Anthropocene Reviewed by author, YouTuber, and tuberculosis advocate John Green. It features a few dozen essays about various parts of day-to-day life. Canada geese, Diet Dr. Pepper, the internet, that sort of thing. I'd had it on my wish list since I'd been a fan of the podcast of the same name and a fan of John Green the YouTuber for a few years at that point. I enjoyed his musings and his prose, and so when I was itching to give reading a try, for fun, for the first time in over a decade, I decided to start there. Now don't get me wrong, it was slow going at first. I trudged through the pages, straining to keep my attention on their words, instead of letting my eyes or my mind float away, or worse, get captured by my phone's flickers. But there was that familiar voice that I'd grown familiar with over the years, and that kept my attention. I got through one page, then another, and then a whole chapter. And since these chapters are self-contained essays, there was a small ping of accomplishment at finishing one. If I stopped reading at this point, well, at least I read something to the end. And funnily enough, that sense of accomplishment motivated me to get through another chapter, and another, and another. Soon enough, the mental grime I'd been trudging through had loosened up, and the screen-induced attention quagmire had become, well, not quite a stream, but more like a soupy swamp. Still a chore to get through, but a little more tolerable. So after I'd gotten through the first book, the first in my adult life, I turned to my next one. Everything is Tuberculosis, also by John Green. A very, very important book for our day and age, highlighting the callous injustice of our global systems and the discrepancies between richer and poorer countries, with a focus on the world's most infectious disease, tuberculosis. Heavy topic aside, I had pre-ordered this book, hoping to one day read it, like a lot of other novels I'd picked up over the years. But in this case, after finishing his other nonfiction book, I wanted more. It had become familiar. Through the years of watching Vlogbrothers, sure, but also from the book I had just finished. And so, I rode that wave, the craving of familiarity, through my mind's attention swamp, clearing a bit more of the muck as I slowly, over time, finished the second book of my adult life. Now, I felt my attention span could take something different, or at least I hoped. So I grabbed another book by a different author that I remember liking during one of my university English classes. Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I was not disappointed. Told from the point of view of an artificial toy person, Ishiguro's prose wrapped me up and held me in, with a very human story that will stick with me for a long time. And with that, I was pretty sure my mind book had mostly been washed away. Or at least I hoped. I felt comfortable, albeit apprehensive, to try wading through unfamiliar waters. I started grabbing books from my local library, almost at random. If the synopsis was mildly interesting, I'd take it home and give it a try. No hard feelings if I didn't get through it. But thankfully, most of the time I did get through it. I read one more book, then another, and another, and another. I was reading after work, before bed, and on the weekends, getting through a novel every week or two, showing up at my library more often than I ever expected. And I'd been able to dispel the charms placed on my mind by my phone's entrancing flickers. That quote by Ursula Le Guin at the start of this video is from the foreword of Tales from Earthsea, the 5th book in her fantasy double trilogy. As that passage implies, this foreword reflects on the role of fantasy and fiction in our lives. Sometimes fantasies can be indulgent escapism, and sometimes the mills of capitalism provide them. Supply meets demand. Fantasy becomes a commodity, an industry. And so, it becomes shallow. However, there are also times where fantasy is insightful and nurturing and healing. Times where a fantastical work, regardless of its medium, is deeply valuable, both for those who create them and for those who engage with them. 11 years after Tales from Earthsea was first published, it was re-released with a new afterword that was, and still is, similarly reflective. As the virtual world of electronic communication becomes the world many of us inhabit all the time, in turning to imaginative literature, we may not be seeking mere reassurance, nor be impelled by mere nostalgia. To enter with heart and mind into the world of the imagination may be to head deliberately and directly towards, or back again, engagement with the real world. I like to think that Le Guin, in this passage, has grown more receptive to the idea that technology itself is merely a medium, as opposed to an ephemeral distraction. Literature, to me, is a similarly vague word to art, where its method of communication is just the canvas through which that piece of art takes shape. Books and video games both are just media of expression. One uses words alone, and the other, maybe paradoxically, uses the very flickers that entrance us. But either way, they are still places where human stories are told. Ink and paper, or code and pixels, it doesn't matter how these stories are shaped. What matters is that they are pieces of art given validity simply by being experienced. And that experience itself is the mark of proof that a story is a piece of art, because there is a human being at both ends, reader and author, player and developer. So whether you choose to engage with Silksong or Shakespeare, it still is a piece of art because someone has taken the time to make it and because you are taking the time to experience it. If any of this is resonating with you, or if you're like I was just a year ago, I encourage you to try to remember this. Regardless of what you choose to read, regardless of whether it's, quote, academic or not, try to remember the fact that it was made by a human being for human beings. It could be the manga of your favorite anime, a fanfiction of your favorite game, or the book of your favorite movie. As long as it's something that you can genuinely engage with and take something away from, then that's proof enough that it's worth your time and worth its own existence. To consume art, much like to create art, is to be human. And in a time where the flickers of electronics are both the reality and the escape, the mundane and the fantastic, the ephemeral and the immutable, remembering how to feel one's humanity is more pressing than it's ever been. And books and video games alike, I think, can be the remembrances of our humanity that we should deeply cherish. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching and for listening. And if you liked it, please consider liking and subscribing to let me know. Also, a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon who helped decide the topic of this video. I wasn't sure if I would actually do it or not, and so to see it win the topic poll was a big surprise. And I hope it wasn't too preachy and that you can take something away from it, whether you do read currently or are hoping to, or read very lightly. Either way, I'll put some recommended books in the pinned comment with a focus on those who are trying to get into reading but don't really know where to start. And so I'll also have some synopses, basically outlining the plot so that you can get an idea of what you're in for. And so yeah, thank you so much again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.